What are the charges leveled against Alexei Navalny this time?
Well, this is his fifth criminal conviction, actually, and this time the Russian state is arguing that he's guilty of his organization, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, is guilty of extremist activities. Whatever this means, of course, is very much a question, and nobody is doubting that this is a political charge against Alexei Navalny. And as you rightly pointed out, he has been the most vocal critique of Putin. So in this case, of course, the official charges does not really mean much, because it was very much expected, and I think Navalny himself was expecting this result, unfortunately. But at the same time, of course, the as you mentioned, it is very much brutal for Navalny, because he will be almost completely isolated. And so far, what we have been seeing is that he was still trying, and he was still keeping the connection with his supporters, and he was sending the letters, and he was able to communicate. But this time round, of course, this trial changes a lot in terms of how he will be able to stay in touch with the outside world.
Natia, is there any chance of him coming out whilst President Putin is in power?
I'm afraid the chances of him coming out while Putin is in power is almost non-existent, I would say. And I think Navalny himself also acknowledges the fact that this is a life sentence for him. And I think the important message that he has sent right before the trial has started was that this is very much directed to the Russian people rather than Alexei Navalny himself, because he acknowledges the fact that he is a prisoner, personal prisoner of Vladimir Putin's regime, and as long as he is in power, he will not be able to come out and leave, even if he does not decide to involve in politics anymore. But I think what he pointed out is that this is a message sent to wider society, to Russians, that anyone who will be willing to go against the regime and oppose Putin or criticize him might face the same fate as Navalny himself.
Is it working, the message, that message that you just referred to? And those of us who've watched the Navalny documentary, which won an Oscar, know very well that Alexei Navalny knew exactly what was going to happen to him when he got on that plane from Germany back to Moscow. He knew he was going to be arrested. He knew he was going to end up in prison. How much of this message of what happens to Vladimir Putin's opponents being stuck in jail is actually coming through to the Russian people? We know how tightly controlled all media is in Russia. Does Alexei Navalny still have his supporters, that movement around him for when he stood in that election and actually got a pretty decent result, all things considering, against Vladimir Putin? Is that support still there? How conscious are Russian citizens of what Alexei Navalny is going through?
Absolutely. I think you're very right. He was able to mobilize the masses, and I think that's why he became so dangerous for Putin. And we saw when he returned to Moscow, and it was a conscious decision. Of course, he knew what was going to happen to him. But people actually, despite the repressions, despite the threats, people went out to support Navalny. I still think that he has supporters, but whether or not these people will be able and willing to express their support in the future is highly arguable, because as we see, any sort of expression of opposition towards Putin is ending up in mass violence. So in that sense, of course, Russians, the opposition-minded Russians, and those who support Navalny are concerned about their personal safety, and it will be generally very hard to mobilize these masses. As Navalny is in prison, there is no alternative voice who has this charisma and political will to make brave moves and address to Russians and mobilize them. And in that sense, of course, it is very hard for people to mobilize themselves against the regime while the risks there are so high. And as we saw as well other opposition leaders, other opposition-minded figures, and most recently, of course, we saw the trial of Vladimir Kara-Murza. He faced the same fate. So I think the messaging there from Putin's regime is quite clear. As long as you stay out, you will be safe. As long as you oppose Putin and create any risks there, you will be facing the same fate as Navalny, Kara-Murza, and others.